What's up, man? As always, let's do a paper. Today's video is about veganism and testosterone. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I got a YouTube comment from one of our followers. He said, Doc, why don't you make a review of this paper, or why don't you just talk about this paper, because it shows that vegans have higher testosterone than non-vegans. Now, look, it's really interesting. Now, this video, I'm gonna talk a lot about how to read science articles, right? Because I want you to become self-sustainable. You should not need me to review articles, to tell you about statistics and kind of break down papers for you, even though that's my specialty, so I'm gonna do that, but you should not need me for that. So I'm gonna try to make you self-sustainable and exactly how to read a paper. Now, the reason I want that to happen is because if you read the title of this paper, it is Hormones and Diet, Low Insulin-like Growth Factor 1, but Normal Bioavailable Androgens in Vegan Men. Now, if you read the summary, it says, in one little phrase in a sentence, vegans had higher testosterone levels than vegetarians and meat eaters. Now, there's this concept of confirmation bias. Now, first of all, I do go on rants, I do go on tangents, I can't help it. I'm sorry if that's not your style, that's just how it's gonna be. I'm gonna read the summary of this paper and point out how people make a mistake. Summary. Mean serum insulin-like growth factor 1 was 9% lower in 233 vegan men than in 226 meat eaters and 237 vegetarians. P equals 0.002, so it's significant. Vegans had higher testosterone levels than vegetarians and meat eaters. If you have the belief that vegans have higher testosterone, maybe because you're vegan, maybe because you want to become vegan one day, or you're trying to become vegan now, any of these beliefs would allow you to do a confirmation bias where you're going to confirm what you already believe and not even read the rest of the paper. And that's probably what you did, bro. If you left the paper at this point because you're a vegan, then you're good. You can live your life very well because now the worldview supports what you already believe. Your worldview is now supported by a science paper. You can be happy. The real success and the real victories in life comes from when you challenge yourself, when you go against your identity in what you believe in. And how does that happen? You visit other cultures, you are around people that are not like you, you learn a new language, you just expose your brain to things that are out of your comfort zone. So we're gonna get into this paper very soon, but that's what I wanted to point out to you guys, what is this paper going to show that vegans have higher testosterone than non-vegans? We're going to see. Once we go through this paper, I'm going to go through the figures, then I'm going to go through my notes at the very end, my notebook here, just to make sure I don't miss anything. So let's get into it. This paper is published in the British Journal of Cancer in the year 2000. And yeah, it looks like a good paper. It's published by guys at Oxford, smart people, Cancer Epidemiology Unit, Imperial Cancer Research Fund, blah, 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 Radcliffe Infirmary, Woodstock Road, Oxford. So it's it's from Radcliffe Infirmary, and it's Imperial Cancer Research Fund. It's not Oxford University, it's Oxford City. You see, again, if somebody would have been like, oh, Oxford, it's from Oxford University. No, it's Oxford is the city. And then the zip code. Okay. Now, this paper essentially talks about multiple hormones. And what they did was they took 200 and something meat eaters, 200 and something vegetarians and vegans, and they did a bunch of tests. They also did like surveys and things like that just to make sure these guys were what they were saying they were in terms of what they ate. And they tried to figure out if there was a significant difference between vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters in different hormonal profiles. And that's very important to us because We want to know what the best diet is. We want to know, we want to keep refining our ebook. We want to keep refining our programs, our video courses, just to make sure that we have the optimal diet, exercise, sleep, etc., for boosting testosterone. Now, just for kicks, let me go through this summary just to show you how this could be interpreted in a wrong way. So again, I read, vegans had higher testosterone levels than vegetarians and meat eaters. If you stop there, that's what you're going to believe. But let's keep reading. But this was offset by higher sex hormone binding globulin, and there was no difference between diet groups in free testosterone, androstenediol, glucuronide, and luteinizing hormone. Aha. Now, before we get into the paper, what is the difference between total free and bioavailable testosterone for those of you who don't know? Total testosterone is, if you count all the testosterone in your body, all the molecules of testosterone, that's total testosterone. Free testosterone is that which is not bound to something, because testosterone is usually bound to either SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, or it's bound to albumin, which is protein, or it can even be bound to estrogen, okay, and other things that can be bound to it in a very small percentage. But usually it's SHBG or albumin. Now, if testosterone is bound to one of these, it's not free. That's what total testosterone is. So your total testosterone doesn't really matter. What really matters is your free testosterone. And free testosterone is usually anywhere from 1 to 2.7% of total testosterone. That's what's healthy. And the reason you might not have very high free testosterone, which is what's important, is because you have high SHBG. So total testosterone doesn't mean shit. When you get your test, get it bioavailable testosterone, free testosterone, SHBG, total testosterone, albumin levels, get everything. Now, what is bioavailable testosterone? Free testosterone is a good measure of how much testosterone you have. Bioavailable testosterone is the free testosterone plus when testosterone is bound to albumin. The reason is because albumin has a very low affinity. Affinity is like how much it likes testosterone, or how much the binding capacity or the binding strength of albumin is to testosterone, okay? Now, it's weak when it comes to albumin, testosterone binds very weakly, so bioavailable testosterone is free testosterone plus the testosterone that's bound to albumin. That's even a better measure of testosterone than free testosterone, because testosterone can unbind from albumin very easily. All right. First thing what we're going to do is we're going to get into the figures. I'm going to go through the figures because I like to do things very visually, and then we're going to go through my notes at the end just to make sure I covered everything. So, we have materials and methods. Okay. First, we look at table 1. In table 1, they basically wanted to show you all the characteristics of this diet group, right? So there's age, weight, height, BMI, energy, protein percentage, total fat percentage, saturated fatty acids, which is basically saturated fat. Oh, one thing to note here, saturated fat can be divided into different types of saturated fat, right? Now, here they looked at saturated fat as one thing. Now, I'm gonna make a video in the future where I'm gonna break down what saturated fat is, if it's good saturated fat or bad saturated fat, are there types of saturated fat? What makes saturated fat good or bad? And is it good for your body? Now, I've already made videos like this before. There's one called 5 foods you can eat to boost testosterone, eat cholesterol to boost testosterone. There's other videos you can watch. Now, monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, P to S ratio, which is polysaturated to saturated, cholesterol, alcohol, and non-starch polysaccharides. These are, now the reason they do this is because they want to control for different factors, right? That's the difference between correlation and causation. This is something you need to know. When something is correlated to something else, that doesn't mean it caused it, right? Let me break this down. Let's say you were on a cruise ship with 1 million people and they did a survey and they found out that there's a correlation between those who are tall and those who, I don't know, play basketball. Now, this doesn't mean that if you're tall, you're going to play basketball. Because there are countries in the world that have tall people who don't even know what basketball is. So the correlation is for that cruise. So if you controlled for, let's say, geographic location or the community in which they did this study, then you'd find out that there's no causation, right? So there has to be a causation in studies, and these are the types of studies we try to cover. And when there's no causation, I point it out to you here. So the reason they did all this is because they wanted to control for different measures. So if testosterone correlates with something, let's say veganism, or let's say cholesterol correlates with meat eating, makes sense? Then they're gonna try to factor in BMI, factor in age, factor in SHBG levels, factor in different things to make sure that, is there a causation or is there only a correlation? So these are the types of things, and sometimes the correlation might even be gone. So these are the things you have to keep in mind. So you see a lot of stuff. Now, at the very right, you're gonna see p-values. A p-value is essentially, if it's less than 0.05, usually it's significant. It means that statistics show that there's a significant difference between the two groups, right? So if we did a study where we compared veganism to guys who have, we measure testosterone and veganism compared to the non-vegans and meat eaters and so on, and let's say the p-value was 0.04. That means that it is statistically significant, but barely. So you don't want to put your life, or you don't want to go all in with your life on this p-value. You want your p-values to be 0.002, 0.0006. You want it to be really, really significant for it to actually matter. Now, I have the authority and the position to say this because I've published multiple studies. For those of you who want to know, go on PubMed, just type in my name, Khawaja, Farhan. A is Abdur Rahman, that's my middle name. And you're going to see the papers I've published. So I understand statistics. I've done these studies myself. Not the cholesterol and testosterone studies, but many scientific studies in neuroscience. So that's what you have to keep in mind. That's sort of my experience. I'm not saying this to brag or anything. It's just a fact. Anyway, people are still going to think I'm bragging, whatever. All right. Now, so if you notice, a lot of these factors, there is definitely a significant difference between these three groups, as you see on the right side. Great, not so interesting. Let's see what's interesting here. Cholesterol is sort of interesting. There's 327 is the average cholesterol for meat eaters, milligrams per I think that is, I don't know what D is. I'm not too sure what D is, but I'll find out and I'll put it in the description for you. It's 327 in meat eaters, 112 in vegetarians, and only 20 in vegans. So vegans' cholesterol levels are very low. That's what we see. We also see saturated fatty acids levels are very low in vegans. These are some of the things that really, really jump out at me. So I'm looking at that. Now if we take that figure, we understand it. Now we go to a figure that's even more amazing. This is it's a table actually, table 2. Here you see many different hormones that they measured, and let's go through each one. IGF-1, this is insulin-like growth factor 1. This is very neuroscience related. There's a lot of IGF-1 in the brain as well. It's a growth factor. It's essentially something that is needed for a cell to grow, for a cell to proliferate, as it's called. Now, what they found out in previous studies that IGF-1 may correlate with prostate cancer. Because what is cancer? It's cell growth. You get a lot of cells like a tumor, and you can't stop it. It's continuous cell growth, and that's what causes a brain tumor. It causes a tumor in your body. That's what cancer is. And essentially, IGF-1 has been known to correlate with prostate cancer. So there's a lot of hypotheses that show that. Again, this paper is 2000. So 16, 17 years of research have been done after this, and we're going to get to those papers in future videos. But that's what IGF-1 simply is. So if you have a certain protocol, a certain diet which has significantly higher IGF-1, there may be a higher probability of prostate cancer in that diet or in that protocol. So what we find out is IGF-1, unadjusted for BMI and adjusted for BMI, is actually very significant between vegans, non-vegans, and meat eaters. What does that mean? So the number was actually 9%. And the previous study they did was, which I'm going to link in the description so you can read that paper too. They showed that the threshold that's needed for an IGF percentage between somebody who might get prostate cancer in the future and somebody who might not is 8%. 8% higher IGF-1 than the normal population. And here the percent was 9%, so it was actually higher. So if we assume that IGF-1 is very highly a causal link to prostate cancer, then this shows that veganism is actually better if you don't want prostate cancer in the future. Now again, this is one study. There's a lot of confounds. The meat eaters, they didn't really look at sugar levels. They didn't look at what kind of meat they ate. They didn't look at if those meat eaters exercised. Because you have to understand, a vegan generally is a vegan because he probably cares either for animals, he is more health conscious than the normal guy. So there's all these other factors involved in people who are vegan. And those factors could be the result that IGF-1 is low. However, they control for a lot of things here, like age and height, and I mean a lot of shit you saw in table 1. And they find that, you know, even adjusted for all of those things and BMI, because BMI can sometimes mess up these statistics. So they even adjusted for BMI. And if you don't know what, most people know what BMI is. If you're not sure, post comment below and I'll be happy to answer that for you. And by the way, all of the stuff I'm saying, I'm going to link in, I'm going to write it all in the description as a summary, like a blog inside the YouTube description. And so you're going to have that. So if you can't watch the whole video, read that. So now that's IGF-1. SHBG is sex hormone binding globulin. That's the thing that it's what has the highest affinity or the highest binding capacity, the, you know, binding strength to testosterone. And we see that SHBG, unadjusted for BMI, is actually much higher in vegans. So if I was to read this with a confirmation bias, oh yeah, you know what, maybe I hate veganism or I don't want to be vegan, and I say, oh, SHBG is higher in vegans, oh, I'm not going to be vegan. Nah. If you adjust for BMI, which is very important in this case, there is no correlation. So you see the p-value at the very end on the right, SHBG is 0.001 for unadjusted for BMI. If you adjust for BMI, it's 0.017. It's not even high, it's not even significant. 0.05 would have been barely significant, and this thing is actually, wait, my bad. It is significant. 0.017, it is significant because it's less than 0.05. I misread that. But it's barely significant, right? It's like 0.02. You want something to be very significant, you better have it be like 0.001 or 0.002. That's what's like real significance. But statistically, this thing is significant. So I could be like, oh, you know what? Vegans have higher SHBG, case closed. But if I really pay attention to the p-value, it's 0.02. And speaking as a scientist, that's not a very convincing p-value, even though it's going to get you a paper. But I'm telling you very deep insights into statistical values in science. 0.02 is shit. So I'm not going to believe that vegans have higher SHBG. But if I was in the confirmation bias and I just wanted veganism to be bad, I would say, oh yeah, SHBG values are higher in vegans. But no, I'm going to have to read more papers to really know that. Now we get into the crux of it, testosterone. Unadjusted for BMI, very significant, right? And vegans have higher testosterone than non-vegans if you don't adjust for BMI. When you adjust for BMI, it's 0.046. It's barely significant. And, you know, so somebody could say, oh, like the guy who, you know, who posted the comment, oh man, testosterone is higher in vegans. Is it? It's like so close to 0.05. I don't think you can argue that. I think it's ridiculous. And by the way, guys, a lot of YouTubers, you know what I'm talking about, only show you the abstract. Actually, a lot of YouTubers, not just show you only the abstract. What about all the paper? What about, like, do you guys understand that? How can you trust someone who doesn't show you the figures, who doesn't go through the papers? Like, I don't understand. I mean, these p-values are so important when you look at these papers. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna make a video soon regarding, I'm gonna apologize for certain things I've said in my previous videos where I was wrong about the science and about the facts, and I'm gonna make an apology video for real this time. So stay tuned for that. It's coming up on the channel. Now we go to free testosterone, right? Free testosterone is the important testosterone. Unadjusted, it's 0.137. It's not significant at all. And adjusted, obviously, it's even lower in significance. So free testosterone doesn't matter between vegans and non-vegans. So you know, nothing to worry about. The A-diol-G, I'm gonna link this in the description. I believe A-diol-G is the thing that, oh yeah, I remember. This is what is associated with 5-alpha reductase and DHT levels. It's like a proxy towards that. Now remember, 5-alpha reductase is the enzyme that converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, DHT, right? You guys know what DHT is. If you don't, put in the comment below and I'll answer it. Again, not significant at all. LH, same thing. LH is what triggers the release of testosterone. LH is released from the pituitary gland. Remember, it travels down to the testes, binds to the LH receptor, and synthesizes testosterone inside the testes in the Leydig cells. That's not significant either. Total cholesterol is super significant, right? So vegans have way lower total testosterone, total cholesterol than non-vegans, meat eaters, and vegetarians. Now, what's interesting here is, just like in a lot of studies that you've seen on YouTube as well as other places, there's no breakdown of cholesterol. I mean, is cholesterol that you see here, is it being carried by LDL or HDL, right? The carrier protein that cholesterol travels on is either LDL, low density lipoprotein, or HDL, high density lipoprotein, right? A lot of times you say, oh, HDL is the good cholesterol, LDL is the bad cholesterol. Not necessarily. It depends on certain things, like, are they oxidized? Is there a free radical that is bound to them, right? There's a lot of different, there's 5 different types of free radicals. So there's things that you can never just read cholesterol. You have to break down cholesterol. What do you mean by cholesterol? What the hell is it? And in the future, as we make more videos, I'm gonna break all of these things down for you guys. So don't worry about it. Like, you're gonna know all of these concepts: saturated fat, cholesterol. We're gonna go deep, man. Coming to Medellin, having more time to read, not having to worry about all this business shit, we're gonna break it down. You'll see. #1 science channel on YouTube. Just wait. There's nothing that's gonna stop us. So that's what we find. So what's the takeaway? I'm gonna go through my notes soon, but the takeaway is IGF-1 is higher in meat eaters and vegetarians than vegans, which could lead for some to believe or hypothesize that meat eaters eating meat might be correlated with prostate cancer. You know, obviously that's a huge stretch, but this is what the hypothesis is by these authors based on this data. Not going to believe it. There's going to be a lot more studies that we have to do to actually understand this. So that's that figure. Now, let me go through my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so summary, you know, we saw the summary, blah, blah, blah. Right, so, you know, the thing I said, what is it called in table 2? ADIOLG, that's androstenediol glucuronide, and it's a marker for 5-alpha reductase and DHT. Intraprostatic DHT. Oh yeah, this is cool. DHT is, I don't know, most of you already know this DHT. Maybe I'll make a video about it in the future. You can comment below if you don't know what DHT is, but it's the DHT inside the prostate. They specifically looked at the marker for DHT. Right, so the way it works, the way IGF-1 works specifically is that there's an interaction between IGF-1 and androgens like testosterone, and that interaction is what stimulates cell proliferation and that correlates with prostate cancer. So blah, blah, blah. You see that. Oh, some interesting thing about the SHBG levels. They were 16% higher in vegans than meat eaters and 12% higher in vegans than vegetarians without adjusting for BMI. And after you adjust, it's 6% higher in vegans than meat eaters and 10% higher in vegans than vegetarians. And again, I know it's significant, but I'm not going to believe it. And then if you look at testosterone, it was 13% higher in vegans than meat eaters when you don't adjust for BMI, and that went to 6%. And again, the p-value was so low, it was actually 0.07, so it's not even significant. So if you really look at it, right, because the value I showed you is the total significant. They're comparing all three, right, meat eaters, vegetarians, and vegans. But if you only compare vegans with meat eaters, unadjusted for BMI, it's 13% higher in vegans, but if you adjust for BMI, it's 6%, and the p-value is 0.07. So it doesn't even pass the significance level. So I mean, it's not even statistically significant. There's nothing to talk about. And again, we're going to review more papers that look at testosterone between the different types of diets. And if you look at testosterone with vegans versus vegetarians, it's 8% higher in vegans, not adjusted for BMI. When you adjust, it's 7%, but the p-value is 0.02, which is again, it's shitty. Blah, blah, blah. And there's no significant difference in like free testosterone, ADLG, and LH. Cholesterol, there's a huge difference. It was actually 17% lower in vegans than meat eaters and 10% lower in vegans than vegetarians. This was the largest to date study to compare hormone levels in terms of diet. And so on. We talked about prostate cancer. That's totally good. And yeah, that's what I have to say.